There are three conditions we can be in. The woke give themselves over to sin. Some of the woke are passive and let sin happen to them, others are more active. Many of the woke want sin and evil to happen to others, as well as themselves. These are the hardcore liberals, or what are called the progressives. They have no boundaries, other than the ones they create as needed. Obviously, most people find the former less troublesome than the latter, because they feel aggressive persons are more to be feared than the passive, but it is society's tolerance of the passive sinner that aids and abets the activism of the latter. In a prison we find the worst of the worst, yet there is tolerable peace simply because the passive is few and far between. The conditions of a prison force inmates to be intolerant. The awake see sin for what it is and seek to avoid it. They may even attempt to combat sin and evil. The woke can be police officers and others who are attempting to maintain the social order, according to the floating standards, but many who are awake are social media posters, and preachers who talk about sin but do little or nothing to change the situation or system. But what is this system that so many refer to, but which has so many different forms? No agreement seems possible about what it is. Perhaps it is more important to discuss where the line between the system and the truth is. But is this the right approach? Because no debate about the evil system is complete without at least an acknowledgement of the alternative. But if the alternative is a system, is it true to say the thing which is causing all of our problems is a system? Perhaps a better way of thinking about what exists is as a disease or parasitic infection. We hear about systemic racism and colonialism, though these are more symptomatic than instrumental. They are the consequence of an infection rather than being a system. White men are in the news a lot as the authors of the evil world system the rest of the world suffers under. Even if the accusation were true, it would still mean that white men were the authors of what most people understand as civilization. There is no lineup of persons seeking to live in Africa, the Middle East, or any of the Far East countries. The flow of migrants is steadily and solidly westward. The great enlightened masses are willing to die for a chance to get to the lands of the much maligned white man. Yet it is here that all of the evils of colonialism, racism, and bigotry are found. Either the evil of the West does not exist, or there are a great many hypocrites who will put up with being debased to get a good meal and something more than a tin roof over their heads. But whatever is wrong needs to be identified. Perhaps the evil is not what we think it is or where we are looking for it. The fact is, when they talk of systemic racism and discrimination, they do not define it in an objective or verifiable way. It is all narrative, hearsay, reminiscence, just so stories. We need testable hypothesis. In what way is a system racist? How does a system systematically disadvantage a race? Can a system identify a person by their race if race is not even a real thing? If one listens to the complaints, it is easy to see that the issue is about rights. Rights concern entitlements. A job is considered something we're all entitled to. If not a job, then the incidentals that come with a job. Many claim all persons have a right to a home, food, clothing, and access to the internet. But where do these rights come from? There are a few observations that can be made. The most obvious fact is that if it does not exist, no right will give it to you. There was no right to access the internet 50 years ago. If one lived in Africa, a right to a house might mean a mud hut. Even in the most prosperous nation, rights to accommodation never means a palace or 30-room mansion. If we are not entitled to a palace, why are we entitled to an apartment or townhouse or even a bed in a shelter? This highlights the relative nature of rights. Your right to shelter is proportionate to the tolerance of those who are the designated providers. Systemic racism, so far as it exists, is embedded in the tolerance or lack of it, of those who service its victims. To put it bluntly, minorities have no rights vis-a-vis the white man that he does not tolerate. There is something deeper going on here than a mean race who can be intimidated to give his victims almost anything they want. This observation that rights are what the powerful tolerate gives us two distinct possibilities. The rights provider can operate according to need or demand. But demand for free stuff is infinite and impossible to satiate. The more food banks are created, the more demand for free food there will be. The more rights one gives, the more rights that are taken. Without the delimiter of costs, the demand cannot have an upper limit. The question is whose ability to pay limits what is taken. Does the ability of the giver to give free stuff limit the giving, or the ability of the consumer to work and pay his own way limit what he or she gets? A right is an expectation, but without a limit on what can be expected, the expectation is irrational. There has to be a source of what one expects, and it will have limits to how much it can produce. If we cannot expect access to the internet before it was invented, we cannot expect access to the internet without identifying the supplier. This may be direct or indirect, but the supplier must pay the inevitable costs that come with a benefit claimed by a victim. One does not need or require a right to sand because there is so much of it and access so widely available there is no cost to its access. Gold is a different matter. But why does not one demand a right to gold, diamonds, and high-value cars? Is there something inherently different about gold and Social Security? The difference is that welfare has people who will provide it and make it their responsibility to see you get it. No one is willing to provide anyone with gold without using the mechanisms of the market. There are people who are tolerant about demands for food and housing. No one is tolerant with those who think the ownership of bullion is a right. But all of those helps to muddy the waters between charity and fraud. There is nothing wrong in an individual looking at a particular situation and deciding it is worthy of his or her personal intervention. But this is not what the issue is here. One does not provide charity based on the rights of the person helped. Indeed, rights invalidate charity. If you give because you are obliged to give because of the person's rights, this is not charity, it is fulfilling a duty. The doctrine of rights invalidates charity. What liberals put in its place is disease, a sickness or infection. It would be wrong to call it a system. In social terms it might be called a scam. Liberalism is a method of securing entitlements for people through fear induced by threats of violence. Liberalism is a war or enemy action more than a system. Liberalism is the institutionalization of terrorism. This is why it is more of a scam than a real alternative to conservatism. But conservatism has become infected with liberalism. Even conservatives tend to look for the shortcut and the quick path to success that necessitates the adoption of liberal tactics. But truth and right have no plan B, cheat sheets, or shortcuts. Conservatives need to get back to their roots. Fear is not a useful way of producing or increasing specialization, the only way progress can come about. Conservatives must abjure the waste and excesses that accompany liberalism and its terror tactics. There is no free ride, there is only economies of scale and the productivity that comes with specialization. This is what conservatives need to focus on. Most conservatives appear to lack a sense of the larger picture. Often, we become focused on the details. We become trapped in cycles of fear in which we continually react to threats, in ways that only appear to make things worse. We cannot placate terrorists or satiate parasites who threaten our means of production. But it is the larger picture that needs to be addressed. The first step is to realize there is two options, and these two options are two systems, or one system and its negative image. We need to learn to identify evil as fear and those who instill fear as terrorists. We need to learn how to identify the liberal and especially the progressive. Liberals are hell-bent on terrorizing the world. The fear they create may be muted, but that is to prevent a concerted opposition from occurring. Conservative and liberal are not two political options, they are life and death. Liberalism is destructive. Directly or indirectly, it will kill its host over time. We cannot sustain the demands of liberal entitlements forever, as the entitlements systematically destroy the very source of what is taken. Terror is not a sustainable strategy. We cannot expect fear to give us the best results. But this means liberalism is a failed methodology and must be abandoned. It is not a matter of tweaking and modifying liberalism, all fear-inducing factors must be replaced with strategies based on faith. If we do not trust one another, we cannot effectively work with one another. It is faith that is missing from this world. We can, with faith, fix things. But this is the implementation of a conservative kingdom, meaning conservatism is the sole social influence and the fear of liberalism is cast aside. Liberalism puts us under men and instill fear in us to control us. Conservatism puts us under God. A conservative kingdom takes away the fear because men no longer have the power to oppress and terrorize their fellow man. The question then is how to take away the power disparities that serve to enable one group to terrorize others? If man is not to have power, it must be given over to God. This is not, however, giving God anything that was not his from the beginning. The power of man is power illicitly taken from God. The power over assets is what we call ownership and can take two forms, private and public. Both are illegitimate claims to what belongs to God. The state has no right to claim property and even less right to assign ownership rights to its subjects. But without the intervention of a conservative kingdom, these sorts of adjustments cannot be made. It is important to start with the small things. Conservatives must pledge to pay for everything they take. There is no freeloading or free riding in the kingdom. But there are crimes of omission as well as commission. It is wrong to have a person help you and not get paid, but it is also wrong to have a person prevented from working. We must not pay those who do not work, who free ride, and we must pay those who wish to work. For this we need a new currency tied to value created rather than property owned. Conservatives work for the kingdom and the kingdom pays the worker for the work they do using a device called preferred shares. Preferred shares represents value or equity. When equity is produced by work adding value to assets, the one who did the work is paid using preferred shares as a type of currency. To facilitate this, preferred shares is contracted to prefers and designated as a currency by the use of the symbol. All human problems are liberal and caused by freeloading. To fix these problems is to eliminate liberalism and its free riding. We do this by the use of a new kingdom currency called prefers.